Go to the gentleman from Maryland for 5 minutes, Mr. Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. Ms. Lee, you stole my question there. I did want to go back to the deepfake issue. And Mr. Sedlick, I think you talked a little bit about technology that exists that allows, that gives the ability to separate out what is real and what is fake. And you said C2 something. And I wanted to get more details on that.
Sure. So a consortium came together, managed, I think, by Adobe or founded by Adobe, and with various industry players. They explored methods of creating a technology that would allow you to use software to determine whether or not an image has been altered and what the provenance of that image is. And that information is stored in the image so that when you're using software to view an image, you can tell whether or not that image has been altered. For example, swapping out a head, changing something, removing something, adding something, any sort of revision to the image to provide that information to the public and to people who might rely on those images, and that is C2PA.
Okay, here's where I'm going with this. So if I guess what you're saying is that, say, a movie or some visual depiction that has the code embedded in it, so that distinction could be made, then you could you have the software to identify it. I guess the question I would have is, what if it's not software generated, or if it's just a visual? Here's sort of the big question. So, for example, body cameras worn by police, and I know this isn't a creative content question, but body cameras have become super relevant in court with respect to police cases, and in many instances, videos. Former President Trump's video in his most recent trial was pretty significant as well. I was sort of curious as if it's AI generated entirely. So you would take the subcomponents of the training piece or whatever, and I apologize. I went to law school instead of any kind of hard science classes, so I'm struggling with the technology terms. But would you be able to tell if an image or a video is generated entirely by an AI approach as opposed to some of it being real or some of it not? Is there a way that you could tell if it's authentic or not? The AI platforms are doing some work on this and coming forward with technology to be able to allow the public to discern what is AI and what is not. With respect to other types of creations or recordings, like you mentioned, the police cameras and such, those embed time code and other information in the recording so that you can tell whether or not there's been anything removed. But in terms of finding something or determining whether an image is AI generated or not, that's right now at the experimental phase with scientists looking at it, image scientists, and I think we're going to see something in the very near future. Okay. Mr. Navarro, did you have something on that as well? Or?
From a musical standpoint, we sometimes use our taste. I did a Turing test at South by Southwest in March where pieces were being played, and I was able to guess about 3/4 of them, but not all of them. Happened to be with very simple forms of music that were style-based. Sometimes the vocals were gibberish. Other times it just were moves made musically that no great musician or great producer would allow. But it gets more difficult. This particular piece that we just heard from the gentleman from Texas, that would have been really, really difficult to tell. And so from that standpoint, I think that's what one of the great dangers is in not knowing the difference.
And Professor Callison-Birch, I wanted to sort of touch base with you on this kind of issue as well. I know we've been talking about copyright law, but from the standpoint of protecting the community, the world, whatever, from these sort of fabrications, which I don't know if they're illegal at this point or not, but are there steps we need to take to address this?
Absolutely. my PhD students have done the largest ever study on human detectability of machine-generated text, and we've found that over time, it's getting harder and harder to detect, but that people can be trained to detect. So I think similarly to how Dan is saying that the latest clip of the fake Drake song is increasingly passable as human, whereas 5 years ago it wouldn't have been. Like, that's a trend that we're on, and I think any sort of basic media literacy that we teach to our children should include this as an element.
Okay, and with respect to visuals, because just from the court standpoint on some of these images, sometimes people's, whether you go to jail or not is determined by a visual or a video clip that a jury might see. I mean, are there ways to make sure that whatever is presented or a judge making a determination about what could be viewed is actually authentic?
There's expert testimony through examination of the images. I think you could likely still detect artifacts of a machine-generated image if it's done carelessly. I think it's going to get harder, so it's certainly something to keep under consideration as time progresses.
All right, well, I want to thank all of you all for coming in today, and I apologize for a question that's a little off the topic, but I think important for us. And Mr. Chairman, I really wanted to thank you and the ranking member. I agree with some of the previous comments about this being a refreshing change from some of the types of hearings we've had previously, and I thank you for this.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I will welcome you to the subcommittee, which has historically been extremely bipartisan. So we're going to keep that tradition going when it comes to, we can't pass intellectual property reform except on a completely bipartisan basis.